Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Perry Blackshear, a filmmaker whose moody, unsettling features They Look Like People, The Siren, and the new When I Consume You, which just came out on digital and on demand, wrap rich character studies within a textured genre framework, telling stories of vulnerable people grappling with profound issues long before the paranormal stuff finds them. His movies haunt you, and I mean that in the best possible way. Perry picked Absentia, the breakthrough feature from the now omnipresent genre filmmaker Mike Flanagan, who followed it with movies like Oculus, Ouija, Origin of Evil, Dr. Sleep, and episodic series for Netflix like The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, and Midnight Mass. But it all started here, with a micro-budget study of a woman named Callie, played by Katie Parker, coming to stay with her sister Trisha, played by Courtney Bell, after a long separation. Trisha's long-missing husband Daniel is about to be declared legally dead, and Trisha needs Callie's support, except that strange things are happening around Trisha, and before too long they're happening to Callie as well. Oh, and a quick note about the sound. For some reason, my mic decided to be incredibly sensitive when we recorded and picked up all kinds of vibrations, and I've done my best to fade out and work around them, but it's weird. Hopefully it won't be too bad. Anyway, this is Someone Else's Movie.
I believe it was his first sort of major film that he did, but it was made for not too much money. I mean, almost nothing. I think probably family and friends, or savings, and with friends in the cast, sort of bootstrapped in the same way that we made They Look Like People. And it was a huge inspiration for me with They Look Like People, and it sort of set me off on a different trajectory. And that's why I picked it, because I've seen tons and tons of movies that I loved and, mattered so much. But this one had such an enormous impact sort of practically on my life that I wanted to talk about it. And if anyone hasn't seen it, I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, it's a great lever into your own work, too, because the moment you picked it, it all made sense. Like, it's one of those films where so much is hinted at rather than shown. It's not as interesting, I think, to just to deliver all the exposition that the characters need, because it keeps us as needy as they are. We're just given this glimpse into something much, much larger. Not just They Look Like People, but also When I Consume You is kind of exactly the same. There's something going on that people aren't privy to, right? It's the. I just did a conversation. I just had a conversation with someone about. I did an episode of a program, a cable series. There's a channel up here called Hollywood Suite. It's a streaming channel and service. They've done a package of sort of retrospective documentaries on films, and I did an episode called Cinema A to Z, but I did the episode on books, and they had me talk about Lovecraft, and I said, like, the real impossibility of a Lovecraft adaptation is that you cannot show the thing that drives people insane, and that's every single one of his stories, right? Like, yeah, it's about people who pierce the veil and pay for it dearly, and your films and this one film of Flanagan's are all about the veil.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying that. I think that, there's something, there was something so dangerous about some of the ideas. Dangerous isn't quite the right word, but it's like people use the phrase existential horror, and I feel like that makes it sound more intellectual than it is. Like, I think one of the fun about horror movies is there's this monster, and the monster comes to the thing, and then if you fight the monster and win, hooray, evil is vanquished, kind of. But the especially the ending of this movie, the way it is hinted at, and the way that they tried to describe it with science but can't, and this idea that there is something so much worse than death, which is this damnation zone that you can get into. I also loved it. Well, I'll just talk about it. So
sure, yeah.
The thing that you said before about how you can never see it. There's many scenes that stick out, but the ones, and I think because he later after this became sort of a mentor, and I sold a TV show through his company.
Oh, that's great.
And I've shadowed him, and I mean, he's everything about the way he, in addition to the movies he makes and the work he does, he I talked to his crew and they were like, I'm never working for another director. And like when I was on set with him, random celebrities would come by and be like, just to hang out and be like, hey, Mike, can you like put me in this movie? And he was like, no, I can't. Your manager would never allow me to like put you randomly in this movie. And they're like, come on. And so it's like building this family of people that, anyway, so it's not just the film itself, but when I looked at the behind the scenes of sort of how he works and the people he works with, that mattered a lot to me too. But I told him that scene in the bathroom where she's brushing her teeth, and then there's the shower curtain there, and she looks around, and it is such a simple scene, but the way he's planted what could be behind there beforehand. Paranormal Activity does a really good job about this, is they like give you these little like brain fears, these sort of mind worms that sit there.
Yeah, I have a running gag about the Paranormal Activity movies where they've made 7 of them and they've never done the fridge door. Like, it's always, every episode, the fridge door opens and swings and blocks our view.
Yeah.
And I've seen most of them with audiences, and people just start tensing in ripples. You can see people's shoulders going up, and they have never paid it off. And at this point, it's a conscious decision.
Yeah,
I just think it's wonderful.
That's a good way of putting that. Yeah. I remember Blair Witch coming out and then walking home in the woods, about 15-minute walk in the dark to my house one time, and thinking like, I can deal with this, whatever. I've walked, because I used to do that walk all the time prior to Blair Witch. No big deal. It's just the woods near my house.
Sure.
In the dark, it doesn't matter. It's just the woods, you know? And I got about halfway in, and whatever mind worm was in me just wouldn't let me. It was too frightening. And there was nothing different about the woods. It was just what was in my head made it impossibly frightening. And I think that is why that's what I took away from that. I was trying to escape into the wall during that little shower scene. I was squirming, and I just, I don't know. He never released you in the way that I think, you know. And there was another scene like that where she goes down to the basement and it's silent, and it's just her head, and it sort of slowly goes past her head into the dark, into nothing for way too long. No scary sounds. It just gets totally dead. And then I think you see like 2 or 3 frames of something, and then it cuts.
Just a shimmer.
And it felt like that same spine, like somatic feeling when you stick your hand into a dark place and you just have to take it out. Like something is functioning at a deeper level that I couldn't watch anymore.
Yeah. The best example of that one, I think, is the push into darkness in Lost Highway, where the hallway just keeps going. Like there's a shadow in the hallway, and you just wait and wait and wait. And again, you see it with an audience, and you see exactly where everyone's tolerance point is.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's not the same, right? Like the release of nervous laughter. I mean, I remember seeing Oculus. I think it might have even been at TIFF, actually. And having people go along with the fun of it, about the way the mirror plays with perceptions. And again, this is a film that achieves its greatest moments with almost no effects. It's all dialogue and performance. And I saw that before I saw Absentia, but then Absentia is like, oh yeah, that's absolutely his thing. Like he's just honing his instrument. And watching Oculus play with perspective and our perspective in the way that it does, some people were not happy. There's nervous laughter, and then there's like angry, like, God damn it, you got me, and that kind of weird twitch that happens. And it was great because he plays people like a Hammond organ, like just rolling through an audience. And the one thing that's really crushed me about the pandemic is having to watch all these horror movies by myself.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think so. I came to horror pretty late.
Oh yeah,
and I think for me, they mostly have been myself and the relationship with the movie, almost like going on a date with a movie, you know what I mean? As opposed to the collective experience, which is interesting now that I think about that, because I saw Hereditary in the theater, which was great. I remember seeing Paranormal Activity in the theater, which was great, because you definitely get those waves of collective experience. But that sort of intimacy of some of the stuff that he does, I think is what I love. I think the Midnight Mass may be my favorite TV show I've ever seen. So I mean, that's not what we're talking about here today, but
No, it's you got room. Go ahead. I'm trying to think of a through line for all of his films, because that's, like my brain tries to do that with any new thing, because that will help me deal with whatever's about to happen to me, especially in horror. And all of his work does seem to be rooted in the fear that you're not in control of your world, that things are happening that not only are you missing out on, but you can't comprehend them. And Dr. Sleep does it, and all of his television work, all of his Netflix shows do it. But he has sort of perfected this one thing of something's in the wall and you can't quite see it. Like just the flitting aspect at the edge of your perception. And to do that on a two-dimensional screen, the way he does with everything, that takes incredible confidence that you can sell the illusion, but also confidence in your actors, confidence in your cinematographer. Like the one time I spoke to him was for Oculus, and he said, like, if he didn't know they could have pulled it off, if he didn't know that they could make an inanimate object terrifying, or at least convince you that other people found it terrifying, then there would be no point to making the movie. So he just, the way he explained it was he psychs himself up for the concept and then plunges in when he writes it. But it starts in Absentia. Yeah,
I think so. It may be one of those things like a Rorschach test. You sort of see what see what you love in there, which is good. I think, good filmmakers, a lot of people can see a lot of things in there, that they can relate to. But I think one of the real thing, because it's a great movie, Absentia, but the thing that made me think differently about horror, because I actually, my big film when I was at NYU grad school was a musical.
Okay.
And I had done a little bit of comedy and some sort of psychological work, because I loved subjective, using camera and sound to create a subjective experience. I had always really liked that. But I had never seen a movie that, there was a drama and then it was really scary, but they both made each other better. Like the sisters' relationship and their sort of spiritual and personal struggles, the horror kind of brought that to life in a visceral, unintellectual, but sort of somatic way. And then they made each other better. They didn't exist in parallel. And he said something in an interview, which I repeat constantly, which was like, he was like, I didn't see this as a horror movie. To me, it was a movie about people going through very scary things. And that changed everything, because I think horror movies have their own, it's sort of like punk or heavy metal, where it's like very much a genre that is a series of promises to the audience about what you can expect. There'll be scares, there'll be this and this and that and the other. But I think sometimes that noise drowns out, like the people in the center and the sort of heart of it all. And some movies like that could be great, but I think people have been trying to make horror TV shows for a million years, and other than anthologies, I don't know, I could be wrong about this, and maybe Twilight Zone and stuff, but they ever really stuck until Haunting of Hill House. And the reason for that, I guess American Horror Story, although that's an anthology, but
it's different. The machinery is different. And it's also more baroque. I mean, the American Horror Story is almost self-parody from the jump, and that's part of its selling point. That's the Ryan Murphy promise, right? That it's going to be huge. But you're right. Flanagan deals in an intimacy that
and he really makes you love these characters. And Haunting of Hill House, by season 5, episode 5, I loved all 5 of them, and I was ready for anything. And I have to really love characters and love their relationships, so that when things get really dark, it's so much scarier because it's someone you care about that feels like you or your sister or your, and it's a different. It brings you inside of the circle of intimacy with horror, rather than just looking at these dumb teenagers dying, which is, it's its own kind of enjoyment. But now it's happening to you or your daughter or whatever, and it's a very different feeling for me. So that idea that horror could be so heartfelt and sort of spiritual, I think changed the way I saw, genre basically after this movie.
Yeah, I can see that. He offers, it's sort of the golden ratio of horror, right? Where it's not that there is any self-aware release. It's not,
Hmm.
no one looks in the camera the way they do in found footage films and just makes it okay for a second for people to be watching this.
Yeah.
Nobody jokes about, not listening to the warnings or anything. That there is
Hmm.
absolutely no condescension to the
Hmm.
genre in his
Hmm.
films. And you can make a Cabin in the Woods movie and have it be a blast. You can
I love
have,
it's great. Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
or the Evil Dead films where they're, like they're playful. Although the first one is an absolute just nightmare, which I love about it.
Yeah.
But the ones that situate the impossible or the inexplicable in something approximating normal life, I just
Hmm.
find, I mean, you can do something like The Exorcist where it's shot like a documentary, but it's really, just this horror story about a family, a mother and daughter. It's not even a nuclear family. It's just two people
Yeah.
who have already started to grow apart before everything awful happens. Stephen
Yeah.
King, famously wrote that it was about, it was William Peter Blatty trying to put a Catholic face on the sexual revolution and the teenage rebellions of the 60s, and
Wow.
parents feeling disassociated from their kids who were all just going wild
Hmm.
and making it the devil's fault and turning that into a challenge of a different
Yeah. Yeah.
sort. And then by shooting it like a documentary, Friedkin just makes it absolutely real and terrifying. Like
Yeah.
it's a dirty, ugly film about horrible things happening.
Yeah.
And Absentia, just because I think of the budgetary restrictions, similarly feels like we're sitting in a room with people. Like that,
Yep.
it's just. I was all set. I revisited it last week, and I was all set to look at it as the sort of a, like a fawn stumbling away from its mother, standing up and running the first time. Because I remember,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it felt like it had paled in comparison to Oculus, but that's because Oculus just looks cleaner and shinier and has movie stars
It's really
in it.
slick, that movie. Yeah.
Yeah, and this one
Yep.
is like, this is a Cassavetes picture where
Yeah.
something terrible is also around.
Yep. Yeah. That's funny you mentioned Cassavetes. I think because it's so real. Yeah. The horror hits differently.
And just the mundane settings too, like these shooting
Yeah.
around Los Angeles locations, and they just feel kind of sterile and empty. And just the notion that the greatest horror you can imagine is in a causeway.
Yeah, it's not out there like in outer space or with these other people somewhere else, in this heightened universe. It's like, right, it's your neighbor. Or I think Stephen King does a pretty good job with that too, where he brings it into your living room, like the scary stuff, like it's just like, it could be just sort of suburban fear of the other or whatever, but it feels very yeah, story about regular people in the world, like trying to live their life, and then this evil comes in, rather than stories about, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's an evil you
Yeah,
can see from your front window.
yeah,
That's the thing that got me on the rewatch. It's just like, oh, that's brilliant. That's just, it's there. It's just
yeah,
there. You can't understand it. It takes the whole movie for us to figure out how it works. And it's the house in The Grudge, right? You don't actually have to do anything to offend the spirits. You just have to come in, and
yeah,
then that's it. And the
yeah,
idea that there's you can try to bargain with it, but it won't do what you want it to do. And the
hmm,
idea of sacrifice becomes pointless
yeah,
because you don't actually understand what it is you're sacrificing yourself to. And
yeah,
this weight just keeps building over the course of the film. I'm kind of amazed at how well it holds up too, given everything else in, like in the rear view.
yeah. That final shot, the spider. I mean,
The thing,
it's
yeah.
all, yeah, it's all set up so that when that happens, you're like, nah, oh god. Um, I mean, I could talk about the film forever. I think the last thing I wanted to mention before I forget was how I don't want to say this in like a woo woo way, but I guess spiritual his work is.
Yeah, you had alluded to that.
Yeah, the finale of, oh my god, Midnight Mass manages to really like talk about the wonderful things of religious life and the courage that all of that takes, while also criticizing the church. But that ending manages to both be sort of apocalyptically terrible and hopeful at the same time. But I think a lot of horror movies are kind of like punk songs, either where they're just kind of like about chaos and the unknowable and all this stuff. And I think that I love those movies, but his feel more I don't want to use the word adult like that, but they have a maturity to them where you can't just punch the monster in the face and then cheer and then it's all over. It's about like acceptance of death, acceptance of disease and your own fate. And I mean, the ending of that TV show, the characters knew they were all going to die and they kept fighting anyway. There was just something different about it. Like I guess there's a maturity to it of a life lived and like fought. And that's the part I think that I like the most. I guess they feel very much like, really have something to say in that regard. And then that's the thing that I love the most. To me, it sort of ties together a lot of his work in a way that feels very auteur driven, and that I really look up to. Yeah.
The thing I take away from them is that there's no nobility in triumph, right? Like you'll pull a couple more years of existence out of whatever you're doing right now. It's not hopeless though, because those years are valuable and the time you have is important. Even in Absentia, she's moved on in her way. Trisha lost her husband 7 years ago to something she still doesn't understand. They've had him declared dead, and she is sort of moving forward with the detective who's ostensibly in charge of the missing persons case, which is both kind of weird. Like you can understand why she would find it weird to explain to her sister, but from their performances, you can tell that it evolved organically. This is a man who saw her at her worst and fell in love with her, and she's not sure how she feels about him, but she's probably carrying his child, like she's carrying somebody's baby. And this supporting character who in any other version of this movie is just an interference, like he's a dingus who's in the way. But he understands his place and respects her enough to say that he'll still be there if she needs him, but he's stepping away.
So weird, right? Like people really trying to do their best, not just all being, it's like to be dramatic, everybody has to be a dick and, or whatever. And he changes that. Yeah.
Yeah. And his story from his perspective is a feature in itself. Like that's another movie that we just aren't privy to, where this man falls in love with a woman with a tragic story and then she just disappears and he has to live with that. And he is like literally haunted by everything he didn't do by the end of the film. And we see it and it lands and he becomes the most tragic of all the characters because he's denied that explanation. It's such a strange little pirouette for the story to take in the end, but you really feel it land.
Yeah, and I love that you brought him up because I think this is another thing that he does relatively consistently, is that after I watched Hill House, I wrote a bunch of notes, and I wrote, one of them was, "We are only with characters we care about." And that show is basically the 6, 7 characters. And no one else exists. Like 1 or 2 characters appear, but it's 10 hours of the same people we love, which I feel like in a lot of horror movies are the pusher, but then there's the cops and there's the thing and there's the people and there's all these other people that die or, hang out, or the hangers on and you don't get to spend that much time with people
developed characters.
Yeah. And the people that you want to be with, you have to sort of wait for the plot to go back to the people you like.
Yeah, I think that's a way of making it easier for the audience to know that this isn't, like this is just a genre picture and nothing bad is really, you can go home when this is over and return to your lives and I'm not trying to actually disturb you. Yeah. Those are the conventions that make all that stuff possible.
Yeah, he's very, I don't know how to say this. I feel like he's fair to his audience, where he occasionally surprises them, but yeah.
And he's fair to his characters too, because they earn their victories when those victories happen, or we understand their motivations when they don't. And it's just that so much of his idea of horror is rooted in loss, right? Like even changing the ending of Dr. Sleep so it's just a little bit sadder. And just tweaking it. He fixes a lot of other things about the book too, but then refuses to give the audience a triumph. Instead, there is a victory, but it's comes at a cost, and the characters are okay with it, which was really quite striking.
Yeah. it's that like difficult truths at the end and not easy answers in that way.
Yeah, and of course the beauty of any horror movie is that it makes a place for these things, and it carves out a space where you can interact with them and believe them for 90 minutes or whatever, and then just go home to your
I know,
bed.
and then it's like a packaged nightmare.
Yeah.
Then you can survive, hopefully. There was one, that was what I was thinking about. He also does this trick in terms of characters and like being with people we like. This is the way I see it, which is that like in any given circumstance, given any choice, you make a character more likable rather than like when two equal things are presented to you. You make a character do something to help their buddy out, not because they want to get rich and famous. Or you like do have a character that like doesn't show up to something because they're hiding something to help. Like it's always like when in doubt, go in the direction of someone that you're rooting for to protect their son or to do something else rather than seek fame and fortune, get them all the monies or do all these other things. And I think that has like a compounding effect, so that by the time towards the end of a TV show or movie, you're just like, I want these people to, I really, really love these people. But I mean, maybe that's me being a softie or something.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to tell you about the latest Shiny Things newsletter, my weekly dispatch about physical media, culture, and maybe even the odd streaming show. This week, I wrote about the end of Better Call Saul, the Blu-ray release of David Cronenberg's Crimes of the Future, and how much fun Tatiana Maslany is having as Marvel's She-Hulk. Subscribe for the price of a latte at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Twitter account. Did you miss reading me here and there? I miss writing. Come check it out. It's better to invest in characters who are worthy of that investment, right? Like they're having just finished Better Call Saul this week. It's like, anti-heroes, they're amazing. But the beauty of that show is that you can watch someone convince themselves that the worst possible decision is actually going to help him or help someone else, right? Like it's just constantly reinforcing his own behavior by screaming about altruism when there isn't any. And it twins up nicely with Breaking Bad, where everything that Walter White does is ostensibly for his family, but it stops being about that really early on.
Yeah.
But if you are legitimately trying to do the best thing, and I'm thinking about Ari Aster's films, which are always rooted in people trying to recover from something and then finding a greater horror in their next stage of their evolution or their emotional development. You walk into everything with the best of intentions and you just get hit in the face by a board.
Yeah.
And it's awful. It's like Callie's journey back from whatever substance abuse issues she's had, where her sister is worried if she opens a beer in her presence that it might set her off, and everybody's treating her so delicately, only to have this land on her and immediately take advantage in its way of the fact that no one will believe her.
Yeah.
Is just genuine tragedy. And that could be applied to almost any situation, horror or otherwise, right? That's something I can imagine myself experiencing. And so you add the insidious nature of what's really going on, and that's just, it's almost unbelievably cruel to put this character through those paces. But yeah, Flanagan loves her and wants her to win.
Yeah. Well, this is really interesting. So this is like a Rorschach test, and I'm fascinated by it because I feel like I feel like there's sort of a spectrum of people. Anyway, well, I'll just ask you the question because I think this is really interesting. So
go wherever you want to go.
I was in a debate with a colleague about this, and it was about Succession, I think, which I sort of watch because it's so good, but I also sort of hate watch it because I kind of hate all the characters, except sometimes I like them, but it goes in and out. But I was like, I have a really hard time watching a show when I don't care about the characters or are rooting for them. And that's why I actually had to turn off Breaking Bad a lot. And then because at some point, both Jesse and I was like, I don't care about you. I feel like, and so I stopped, but then I was like, I know it's really good, so I'll like it again. And then eventually they hooked me in again with something else. And someone was like, oh, well, of course you want to just watch to see what happens next. And I was like, why would you watch a basketball game if you're not rooting for one side or the other? And they were like, to see who wins. And I was like, but why would you care if you're not,
Oh no, it's the essential divide in sports, entertainment, in anything, right? Like some people don't need a vested interest. And
it's fascinating to me. I guess I feel like it makes me feel like such a softie or something. But where do you fall on this? Do you know about yourself? Where you fall on the spectrum?
I do. I had that with Mad Men because it lays out Mad Men and The Sopranos both actually just sort of lay out their characters in the pilot and then just reiterate their points. Don Draper can sell happiness to anyone but not experience it himself. It's great. Do you need me for another 7 seasons? Because I got stuff to do. Like I understand the appeal of watching people come at him and challenge him and be obstacles or enable him as as things go in the whole Sterling Cooper world and all that stuff that gets built out. It's all very busy. But when you're dealing with a central character, and they do keep coming back to the central character of Don Draper, who is not going to change no matter how badly he says he wants to, I just found it exhausting. And then it was also the rearview mirror aspect of, look how dumb everybody was in 1960, that they didn't know what gay people looked like and they didn't understand closeting. It's like, yeah, okay. I get it. I understand the commentary, but it's not exactly, it's not entertaining to me to be smug about how far we've come now when I know we're not nearly where we could be. And the parallels aren't necessarily very artful. And that, and The Sopranos too, where, as much as I appreciate what David Chase was doing, I got Goodfellas and it's over in 2.5 hours. Like it's
so
all
brutal.
It's
so
all
many
there.
sick burns going on right now.
All there. And Gandolfini's great. A lot of the other performances are fantastic, but there was no emotional investment because it was so clear that he's never going to change. He's going to use the therapy as an excuse and get worse. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. There was interesting. I was talking to someone about this show that did nothing for me. And we were trying to figure out why they loved it. And they were like, I just feel like the character is me somehow, or a version of me that's terrible.
Sure, yeah.
And so I can watch this id play out and get punished in a way that's satisfying.
Oh, I get that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that Tony did it more for me than Don Draper. Like with him, the depression, I don't know. I mean, something about, I'm nothing like Tony Soprano, but there was something about masculinity in there that I felt, I don't know, but I watched it again and I was like, God, these characters are hard to, deal with sometimes. Anyway, that is such an interesting thing. I have this extremely stupid cockamamie theory that that sometimes shows or whatever really click because it's like inside. This sounds so stupid when I say it out loud. Maybe I should. Okay, I won't keep it to myself just in case someone wants to laugh at it. This idea that like inside your head you have this sort of mini pantheon, like Jungian pantheon of the asshole and all these different types of versions of you.
Sure.
And I think when I write, I often write just like the sort of versions of me as the sort of fractured, prism of. And then you see a show and they're like, oh yeah, all of these are me. They're different versions of me. I see all of them. There's the worst version of me. There's the younger version of me. And then you see some shows and they're like, none of these are me. I'm all looking at them like interesting, but they're not, I don't have that deep feeling,
That's how I felt about You're the Worst, which captures so much about the narcissism and entitlement that I worry that I have and articulates it in just increasingly fun ways. Whereas something like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which I've watched all along, I've never felt that I identify with any of the characters, but I'm watching it for the elegance with which they play out the concept, because I like all of those actors. I love the idea, and the fact that they do keep coming up with in-character ways to be worse than they were last season is kind of remarkable. And I'm just sort of, I'm agog at it. But I don't feel like I see myself in any of them. Yeah.
I guess I was thinking of, now I'm starting to map, like even something like Rick and Morty. I'm like, I see it. I see young, like there's some sort of, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah,
it's hard to describe, but like there's something very deep about all that. Or maybe not. Maybe it's just like a BuzzFeed test or something.
Yeah. Well, it's both. I think culture is both at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
God help us.
God help us all.
But this does get us to your work, to how you express yourself in your own films. And yeah, the films you've made are very, very similar to Flanagan's in that they are kind of emotional horror stories about people pushed by external and internal pressures. So, I mean, was Absentia like, was it like a lightning bolt moment for you when you saw it that this was possible, or were you already kind of working towards that?
I think so. So They Look Like People was supposed to be basically a drama about failure in your 20s, based a little bit on a friend of mine who went through this period of sort of psychosis because of like medical drugs he was taking, and a bunch of bad life stuff happened at once. And there was a period where he told me later that if he didn't have like family or me or good friends, that he may have, sort of gone off the deep end. And I was like, okay, it's a story of this 1 week where the character like might or might not sort of go to jail or something worse. And if friendship can save it, that was sort of the idea when I started it. But then the more I researched schizophrenia, and the more I've mentioned this somewhere else, but there's a video, I think PBS did it, it was like an old virtual reality recreation of what it's like to be a schizophrenic. This was in like the 90s, I think. So it's very cheesy in some ways, but it was so frightening. And it was so frightening in a way that I don't think it was like a nightmare that you could never turn off. And the never turning it off, I think, was the thing that was so upsetting, because you just you can't hug your, like you can't, there's no reality anymore other than the nightmare. There's no other than the nightmare. And it was so unbearable that I thought, okay, I want to be true. I want to do all my research and be as true as I can to this, and make sure that this character is really, we see it from his perspective and we feel for him rather than just having him be this other. Because I love making stories about internal states made external, like a monster or any kind of genre stuff. And I love like subjective stuff. Like I remember watching Requiem for a Dream when I was 17 or something, and I really felt like I was tripping. I mean, it was amazing. It was like a movie can, they're such empathy machines that you can really put yourself in the shoes of someone else. I love doing that, being able to be inside other people's brains, kind of. And so it just wound up being scary without me really realizing it.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of pause about that until I saw his film, when I realized you could, the horror gave the drama teeth and muscle, and the drama gave the horror soul and heart. And I thought that they, instead of running parallel, they like hybridized to something better than either of what they could be on their own. And you could still do something really scary, but maintain a heart and a soul within it. And in fact, by the time you got to the heart, it felt really hard won rather than just handed to you on a platter. And so after that, I kept working sort of in this space. It's funny because we shot Siren actually before They Look Like People even came out. So we had no idea if it would ever be released on the world, but we just wanted to make another film. So we shot that one before we actually learned any lessons from the first one. And then this third one, I actually shot this almost 4 years ago.
God.
But so before the pandemic.
Yeah, I figured that must have been the case. I guess I saw it last year at Fantasia.
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah. But what happened was I got some gigs, some writing gigs, and then worked, I sold this TV show through his company. And so there was like a year and a half of working on that. And so then when that, like, now it's sort of circling development. And so I was like, okay, I need to finish this thing. But it felt, it almost felt like resurrecting something from a very dark part of my life that was written extremely fast and written extremely instinctually. So it feels like the editing process almost felt like an exorcism where I was taking all this sort of darkness and sort of trying to put it on the screen and kind of go into history. So it's a strange process looking at it now and talking about it now.
Well, it must be. You're an entirely different person.
Yes, a very different person. And it was sort of, I think, probably the darkest, maybe the darkest moment I had sort of been through. And I think that I cared a lot about. It wasn't just me; it was people that I loved, and people in my life. And I really wanted to give this experience of what it's like to be in that state of anxiety and unable to kind of handle the world as it is, and that sort of overwhelm and kind of the sort of with the sound, the kind of sonic assault, and really give this feeling of there's a moment early on that about 17 minutes in, there's something sort of shocking happens, and I tried to replicate a feeling I had when I had this pretty bad car crash a few years ago, where you think you're going to react differently. You think you're going to be scared. You think, I don't know what I think I would be like, but it became extremely surreal. Like everything got really flat. And I sort of felt like it wasn't me that was talking, but I was sort of a character in a video game, kind of just existing in it.
Disassociation.
Yeah, I guess that's what it was. I'm not smart enough to know exactly what it was, but it was definitely like very distinct feeling, and everything got very vivid. And I tried to do that. So I think someone watched the movie and was like, geez, that was like a lot. And I was like, I know, it's a lot. It's like an intense, it's like an assault in some, really feeling that sort of claustrophobia of that state of anxiety and panic, that sort of panic of loneliness and like being by yourself in a monstrous world.
Yeah. And then you've added real monsters. So
yeah,
that sort of makes the metaphor concrete, but it makes it a little bit easier to watch, because if there's something supernatural, then I don't have to invest my own reality. But also, if there is something supernatural, then that changes the entire calculus of the film, and I have no idea what's going to happen next. I'm thinking about something like Lodge Kerrigan's Keen or Clean Shaven, where you're similarly suffering right along with the protagonist. You never leave their heads. But without the release of genre, it's excruciating, right? At least if there's a monster, I can occasionally think about the monster. I can just get out.
Yeah. And that's a good way of saying it, because I actually have sort of a hard time with movies like that, which is ironic given that I wanted to do the same thing. But I think
no, the monster is your coping strategy. I absolutely get it.
Yeah, it does. Yes, like it's definitely a coping mechanism to, like, I was reading about, I don't know, I shouldn't start too many sentences with I was reading about, because it makes me feel like I don't know. It's sort of like when people said, like, so I was listening to a podcast, and I'm like, oh no.
That's all we do now. It's fine.
And I think that this idea, I learned that when you're lonely, it triggers the same receptors as physical pain, which I don't know if that's real, but it feels true.
Yeah, that
experientially. And it's sort of like the loneliness I felt like I was being bludgeoned, kind of. And part of the movie was like, what if there was actually a bludgeoninger out there that I could hit with my fists back against? And like, what would that be like? Because it would feel great to be able to hit it with fists,
Yeah. Like, and it gives us hope too, right? Because if there is something that is the physical embodiment of depression, then we can all fight back.
Yeah, we can take a baseball bat, and especially in a movie where, like, I don't know, I mean, I'm not a great puncher in real life, but my like fantasy version of myself is a great puncher, and so this sort of like this almost sort of weird adolescent fantasy that Wilson gets into, of like, yeah, I can be this like dark superhero and fight back, and how the kind of, in some ways, he kind of needs that to get through what he's going through. Like, yeah, like you said, coping mechanism. And in the other way, it's not, I think, in the times in my life where I've wanted to be a dark superhero when I was in my early, I mean, it usually doesn't end very well. Maybe it's ended well for someone, but not for me anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Self-knowledge is important for these things, I think.
Yeah. You run out of runway at some point, I think. I was talking to someone about this. I would be interesting to hear what you think, and I don't know if it's a male thing because I'm not sure. I've only lived as me, but there's this moment when you're young, especially if you're like a nice guy or something, where you sort of are confronted with the fact that the world isn't particularly nice, and you have a choice, which is to either kind of hope that it gets better or to kind of be like, okay, it's time to get real. It's time to like, if the world is monstrous, I got to be monstrous back. Otherwise I'm going to get run over, Yeah. And you sort of go through almost like a second, or at least this happened to me, go through like a second adolescence where you're like, okay, time to be fuck everybody. And then sometimes for a while, it actually kind of works. And the more it works, the worse it is.
Yeah.
Because then it's actually reinforcing all the terrible decisions you make.
Yeah. In certain disciplines, it can serve you really well for a short time, I've discovered. Yeah. Not for me. I've never been I was a journalist for decades, and that's just, being an asshole just means people don't want to talk to you. It really quickly works against the thing you're supposed to do. Yeah. But then there are, like sales agents where steamrolling people is the whole point. That's where you think, like, whether it's car sales or movie reps, or I've dealt with publicists. Like, there were people in the 90s who were coming off the Miramax juggernaut and just convinced that was the way to be. And all you have to do is just establish your dominance by any means necessary, even if that just means being an absolute dick to people. And it never, they never lasted. They got what they wanted in the moment, but that was the extent of it. Yeah.
And it's like, and sometimes Wilson, the character is sort of like some like version of me that was like very like when I was a kid, sort of, or something like that, doesn't want to grow up because, and I did, sometimes I felt like kind of shaking him and be like, just get your shit together, man. It's not, the world isn't Lord of the Rings. Like, come on. Yeah. At some point you have to face this fact. And I think there's a very necessary aspect of that. You need to be able to protect those you love. You need to be able to stand up for stuff, and I think that fight between knowing how to be soft, like to remain soft enough to love and to be a kid, and also hard enough to be able to live in the world that is not easy, is the struggle. And so I went too far when I was in my early 20s. And I had enough good friends and my girlfriend at the time that sort of sat me down, or like, whatever is going on here needs to fucking stop. I mean, it doesn't need to, but we'll stop hanging out with you. Like we just, it's too much. So, but that definitely, that like ping pong kind of between feeling not tough enough and then becoming an asshole and sort of finding a balance there. Part of the movie was about that, and Daphne being this character that was kind of like the you that you want to be, or someone that you look up to, that's like, stop whining, stop crying, stop fucking being you. Like, and
find the version of yourself that I want to be around.
That doesn't suck. Exactly.
Yeah It's
exactly.
not the worst way to live, honestly. I mean, I have to admit that most of my life as a mature adult, in air quotes, is just like, what would a good person do, and then doing that. And eventually people think you're good, and it works.
Yeah, that sounds very
sociopathic is what it sounds like.
No, it's
now that I'm hearing it out loud.
it's I think that's Marcus Aurelius, I went through a period where I had a big health scare when I was younger, lifelong atheist. And then I just started to read, you can sort of see it in the film, like, especially Stoicism, Thomas Merton, Tolstoy, all this stuff kind of like got me through a really hard time. And so that is a very good, that's, as far as one sentence life philosophies, I feel like you could do way worse than that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And if that slips into your cinema, then other people will be the better for it.
Yes. Although I think it's tough. I don't quite know how to talk about this because it's sort of weird territory, but it's been exciting to me to see horror movies have a lot more purpose behind them recently.
Yeah, I know.
I think there's so much to mine in there. I'm also wary of kind of flattening experiences, or I don't know, there was a version of this story that could be very exploitative and also very didactic somehow. So I think with this, I try to talk about the stuff I love, the stuff that I and my loved ones went through, but have it be like, specific to the characters and specific to this journey, so that when, the monster is sort of defeated, but then it kind of comes back, that feels very personal. Because I think I know, I think you know what I mean. It's like it becomes a pilgrim's progress sometimes if you don't stay true to the characters or whatever.
Yeah. The fight's never really over. It's just a different monster.
Yeah. Again, these are very good quotes. I feel like I want to put these on, like, the jacket or something.
Oh, help yourself. Go for it. We share the rights to this episode.
No, well, this is, the movie, talked about this in before, but yeah, it's sort of wonderful looking back on it now. The actors, coming back to Absentia, I'm realizing, talking through this, there were two big things I learned. There was a lot, but two things that were sort of foundational to my later work. One was this idea that genre and heartfelt human drama could sort of hybridize and make something even more exciting for me. Because sometimes genre to me feels more real than reality, because our world, when you're angry, the world feels on fire. And when, someone doesn't like you, it feels like the world's falling apart. And the second thing is that looking at all the interviews with him and talking to him after the fact, there's this myth that you have to make movies. There's this myth that to make art, it has to be like, everyone hates each other and people want to die and like everyone's manipulating each other and all this stuff. And the way that he works and the sort of crew that he has around him just made me think, like, okay, here's someone I can look to that is telling me that you don't have to do it like that it can be lifelong working relationships that get stronger with each movie, that you get a shorthand and there's a lot of trust. And that's what we sort of built with our little team. And it's exciting to expand, there's like bigger movies on the horizon and TV shows and stuff. But I think about Benson and Moorhead a little bit too, where they're like, God, I want to see their new film so bad, the Dirt too. One.
Yeah.
But this idea of like it doesn't have to be terrible. The movie subject matter is difficult enough.
Yeah, that's it exactly. It can be cathartic without being a catharsis off stage, right? Like you save it all. It's people like Cronenberg and Lynch, and I've just talked about this, and I think in another episode, and John Waters, where they get it all out, and they're just the nicest, calmest people in the world, and they're going out there and they're working with people and making they're making actors' lives better by doing things the way they do it, and they're all of a certain age too, where it's just like, I don't have time to argue. I work with Cronenberg. Cronenberg works with Viggo Mortensen because they shared the same sense of humor, and you see it paying out. It's just it's lovely.
I was talking to some sort of I'm trying to figure out a way to say this. It doesn't sound douchey. Like relatively famous person.
Okay.
And they were like, man, I just had a kid. I'm just tired. Like, I just want to make cool stuff with people I like really fun, great stuff that I feel good about. Like life's too short to like have this shit suck. Like, let's make it awesome and do it with people that we get along with. I guess that's a good we came around about at the end here. That's a good way to wrap things up.
Yeah, it's a great motto, and that plus don't be an asshole. Those are basically the only rules I care about anymore.
Yep.
My thanks to Perry Blackshear, whose new movie When I Consume You is available now on digital and on demand. It's a concentrated atmospheric creeper with a compelling story and quietly heartfelt performances by Evan Dumichel and Libby Ewing, and you should see it. Thanks also to Kayla Heyer. She knows what she did. You can follow Perry and his team on Twitter at LookLikePeople, all one word, and you can find Absentia on DVD from Phase 4 Films, and it's also streaming in the US on Tubi, and it's available to rent or buy on various VOD platforms in the US and Canada. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 46 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your booster when you can. I'll see you next time.